the last two chapters in book 2 are called Lower and Lower and Down. So Lower and Lower, we've just had the chapter called Mrs. Sparsit's Staircase. Lower and Lower depicts Mrs. Sparsit watching Louisa and James Harthouse and imagining that Louisa's going lower and lower down this staircase towards this disgrace as she sort of confesses her love to him and maybe runs away with him and brings this disgrace upon herself. And then we see that the next chapter is called Down, so we assume that that is Louisa at the bottom of the staircase because she has disgraced herself by confessing love to James Harthouse, but actually it refers to the fact that she's fallen down at her father's feet and confessed that utilitarianism hasn't worked and that she's been left with this very sort of empty life and this real lack of emotion. The two chapters are often really criticised for being overly melodramatic, and often it's seen that the end of book 1 is really great writing because it's so subtle and so understated, and we get that real lack of movement as we see the relationship between Louisa and Gradgrind, where there's not really any emotion there. And these are seen as being overly melodramatic by contrast, but actually I think that's sort of the point that, you know, Dickens has restrained himself to show what utilitarianism is doing by choking the life and the emotion out of these people. And now it sort of breaks out, and now he's sort of really, you know, destroying that system and watching it fall around Mr. Gradgrind. So I think the melodramatic nature is very, very deliberate and very, very effective. We get at the start of chapter 11, right at the top of page 192, the figure descended the great stairs steadily, steadily, always verging like a weight in deep water to the black gulf at the bottom. So we get the sense of it being inevitable that Louisa's going to disgrace herself and go to this great gulf. Again, with the word gulf and the black, there's that sense of void, that sense of that this has happened because of what's not in Louisa, that this emotion just isn't existing on her. Obviously, it ends up that it is inevitable that she does fall down, but in a very different way to what Mrs. Sparsit imagines. We're told towards the bottom, about 3/4 of the way down the page, about Harthouse. There were times when he could not read the face he had studied so long, and when this lonely girl was a greater mystery to him than any woman of the world, with a ring of satellites to help her. So there's that idea really that even to Harthouse, she's this very, very closed book, that there's this almost veil, you know, in front of her. So again, it's that focus on the void there, and this is stressed throughout the chapter, that there's real, you know, there's things missing in Louisa really. When we get onto page 196, Mrs. Sparsit is creeping up and spying on Harthouse and Louisa to try and catch this relationship as it's sort of developing, and we get a description about a third of the way down page 196. Bending low among the dewy grass, Mrs. Sparsit advanced closer to them. She drew herself up and stood behind a tree like Robinson Crusoe. So we get this sense of real threat from Mrs. Sparsit, you know, her being this real sort of threat to Louisa. So again, she's not a silent woman, Mrs. Sparsit, but again, she's in the background, she's observing, she's watching, and quite a dangerous presence because of it. So we get the threat, but also the fact she's compared to Robinson Crusoe. Now, Dickens in book 1 mentioned Defoe, so at the time, basically, Daniel Defoe was seen as a writer who wasn't maybe as respected as some of the others, and Dickens is making his case really that Defoe's as good as anybody. You know, he's making the point that popular writers and circus performers are as great a form of entertainment as any. So comparing her to Robinson Crusoe, Dickens again really making his case for sort of popular literature with that reference, as well as, you know, stressing Mrs. Sparsit's threat. About 3/4 of the way down the page, we're told that it was remarkable that she sat as still as ever. The amiable woman in ambuscade had seen her sit at any period in her life. Her hands rested in on one another like the hands of a statue, and even her manner of speaking was not hurried. So Mrs. Sparsit gets really frustrated here because she wants Louisa to disgrace herself, and Louisa just sort of sitting really, really still. And again, Dickens is focusing on that lack of movement. Now, we had that at the end of book 1. So yes, this is a much more melodramatic chapter where stuff happens, but again the focus is on her being like a statue, her being still, that lack of movement, because she hasn't got that emotion inside of that side of her sort of died out really. So it's still there, so it's a very deliberate move by Dickens. I think it's still referencing back to book 1. And then from halfway down page 197 we get a great paragraph there where it describes Harthouse sort of making his move on Louisa, really expressing his love. But we're seeing it through Mrs. Sparsit's eyes, so we're getting her sort of joy almost and excitement that Louisa's finally going to disgrace herself. So it starts, Mrs. Sparsit saw him detain her with his encircling arms. So it's all from Mrs. Sparsit's point of view. But again, that language is great, isn't it? Saw him detain her. So again, it's a man sort of trapping a woman and silencing a woman, which is what we've had all the way through. So it's this idea that this relationship actually is just a product of exactly the same issue as Louisa's relationship with Bounderby. It's a silenced, entrapped woman. We were told about Mrs. Sparsit's greedy hearing, tell her how he loved her and how she was the stake for which he ardently desired to play away all he had in life. So Hardhouse's emotions are sort of discussed and laid out and sort of listed, but because we've seen it from Mrs. Sparsit's point of view, we've seen just how insincere they are. We've seen it from her sort of, it's as a greedy perspective, because she's so desperate for him to say it, to get Louisa disgraced. So I think we get, you know, the danger that Louisa's in and the fact that these feelings aren't really sincere at all. It goes on all this and more in his hurry and in hers, in the whirl of her own gratified malice, in the dread of being discovered, in the rapidly increasing noise of the heavy rain among the leaves, and a thunderstorm rolling up. So again, this list, all these emotions are sort of just listed, you know, almost emotionlessly, because it's just Mrs. Sparsit desperate to sort of get it. And then at the bottom of page 198, we're told both listened to the thunder, which was loud, and to the rain as it washed off the roof and pattered on the parapets of the arches. 2 or 3 lamps were rained out and blown out, so both saw the lightning to advantage as it quivered and zigzagged on the iron tracks. So Dickens really clearly using that pathetic fallacy. It's a big thunderstorm sort of rolling up here. It's this big impending crisis. So we've seen him sort of use that melodrama and all these features of weather to build up this idea that, you know, something big's going to happen, some big disgrace is sort of coming. Again, it's a nice little contrast to Atonement, where the whole of part 1 of Atonement is in this hot weather, where again we get this sense of almost a storm brewing. It's too hot. Same thing happening in Hard Times. Same thing again with the disgrace of a woman and this loss of innocence. And we get at the top of page 199, we get the fire and steam and smoke and red light, a hiss, a crash, a bell and a shriek. Louisa put into one carriage, Mrs. Sparsit put into another, the little station, a desert speck in the thunderstorm. So again, that idea of, you know, the drama sort of building, but again, that sense of crisis sort of building up, and you would get that crisis in the chapter down. So on page 200, about 3 or 4 lines down, Mr. Gregron described, he sat writing in the room with his deadly statistical clock. We had that at the end of book 1, we got it again at the end of book 2. So that clock, an image of time passing, which we get at the end of the first book, end of the second book, because that's what this is about, isn't it? It's about Louisa's lost childhood. And then Louisa speaks up, right at the bottom of page 200, how could you give me the life and take from me all the inappreciable things that raise it from the state of conscious death? Where are the graces of my soul? Where are the sentiments of my heart? So Louisa's listing these questions, and again Dickens is focusing on what's missing, you know, what's missing, all these emotions that aren't there. What have you done, oh Father, what have you done with the garden that should have bloomed once in this great wilderness here? So sowing and reaping, remember, reference to agriculture and growing, and Louisa's focused on the fact that nothing's blooming, nothing's growing in her soul, because all of that stuff is empty. She goes on about just before the halfway point. What you have never nurtured in me, you have never nurtured in yourself. But oh, if you'd only done so long ago, or if you'd only neglected me, what a much better and much happier creature I should have been that day. So again, that idea of growing the wrong things in Louisa. Actually, the focus is on what's not there. I think the key thing as well, though, is that Louisa says, you know, she doesn't blame him. Gregron, remember, is not a hypocrite. He just represents what utilitarianism has done to people. She carries on halfway down the page. Father, if you had known when we were last together here, what even I feared while I strove against it. So again, there's that sense that Gregron has missed things. The focus on what's not there, because actually Gregron isn't a liar like Bounderby. He has just missed all these signs. And we get right at the end of this sort of little bit, so about 2/3 down the page, she says, you know, if you'd known all that, would you have given me to the husband who I'm now sure that I hate? He said, no, my poor child. That really simple response, just simple words, simple sentence, to show actually his total regret. She carries on, would you have doomed me at any time to the frost and blight that have hardened and spoiled me? So again, that sense of things dying out. The sense of winter coming. Remember, we get spring, summer and autumn with the book titles, sowing, reaping and garnering. We don't get winter. Dickens is warning that worse things are sort of still coming. And Louisa carries on and says that, you know, I've lost the spring and summer of my belief. So we get at the end of book 2, at the end of reaping, which happens in summer, Louisa saying, I've lost the spring and summer of my life. And then at the end of a sort of a big speech on page 202, about 5 or 6 lines down, she ends by saying, now hear what I have come to say. So finally, it's a woman who isn't silenced, who is speaking out against what's happened. Halfway down the page, she carries on, you know, my dismal resource has been to think that life would soon go by and that nothing in it could be worth the pain and trouble of a contest. It's exactly what Mrs. Gregron did, just gave up on life. So it's this silence woman who is speaking out now. We get on the top of page 203 a lovely little image. Basically, she says, are they able to direct the anatomist where to strike his knife to the secrets of my soul? That idea that Louisa says, it doesn't matter how many facts you've got, doesn't matter what medical knowledge you've got, you can never understand the human soul. Again, the focus is on the emotion that's missing. And then he says about 5 lines down, Gregron replies, he says, "What can I do, child? Ask me what you will." There's that sense that the answer here is in childhood. We've had that hinted all the way through, that Sissy, who represents childhood innocence, is the answer. She's the one who can actually make things better. Gregron shows it there. He's gone from this man who likes speaking to a man who simply asks, "Ask me what you will, what can I do?" With halfway down the page, we're told that Gregron saw a walled, dilating fire in the eyes, steadfastly regarding him. So there's that idea, isn't it? Fire breaks out. Louisa's like this fire that's burning, and now it's out. That's why we get this melodrama. Dickens is crushing utilitarianism around Gregron's feet, doing it for that reason. It's deliberately melodramatic to strike out against. We've had all this emotion missing, now it's all coming out. And that sort of is implied right towards the bottom, about 10 lines from the bottom. The feelings long suppressed broke loose. This is melodramatic, but it's not a fault of the novel. The whole point here is that book 1 is so restrained and so sort of emotionless because the fire is now breaking out, because Dickens is destroying utilitarianism in the best way he can. And Louisa says, a couple of lines from the bottom, "All I know is that your philosophy and your teaching will not save me. Now, Father, you've brought me to this. Save me by other means." In other words, utilitarianism just does not work. It has failed, and something else is needed. Sissy's love, Sissy's emotion is needed instead. Which ends the chapter on page 204. She says, "Let me fall on the ground." So we get another let it happen, let me. Gregron just got to stand up aside and just watch Louisa fall to the ground, representing the way that utilitarianism is crumbling to the ground. She represents that system. She's been brought up according to that system, and now she's on the ground. And then right at the end, we're told, "He laid her down there and saw the pride of his heart and the triumph of his system lying in an insensible heap at his feet." So it's just utilitarianism just crashes to the ground, just seeing what Gregron's done. Interestingly, Stephen in book 3 also goes into a pit. He also falls down, again as a model of what utilitarianism is doing to good people. Dickens giving a very, very clear warning. Yes, it's melodramatic, but that's the point, that utilitarianism is not working, and he's fighting it in the way that any author would fight it, with extreme emotion, because he's not a learned author. He's not one of these, elite authors. He's a man of the people like Daniel Defoe, who's expressing it with very, very clear and simple emotions.